Welcome to our second week of the Fort Collins Book Fest 5-year celebration. My name is Kristen Draper, and I am the Digital Literacy Librarian at the Poudre River Public Library District. Today, we are celebrating our 5 years of the Fort Collins Book Festival, a virtual celebration of books and brews, writings and riffs, food and thought, big science, and the great outdoors. As always, we are also celebrating the importance of literature, writing, books, and our libraries. Check out the virtual program at www.focobookfest.org. We have book talks, discussions, panels, prose, and poetry readings, all free. Make sure you attend as many as you can. Please share with your family and friends. Before we get to our session with John Fielder and Jeri Norgren, I'd like to thank our sponsors. This festival could not happen without their generous support. Today's event is produced by Poudre River Public Library District in partnership with CSU Morgan Library. Our presenting sponsor is City of Fort Collins Fort Fund. Further support has been presented by Friends of the Poudre River Public Library District, Friends of Morgan Library, the Lila B. Morgan Endowment Fund, Downtown Development Authority, Liggett, Johnson and Goodman, PC, Front Range Community College, Downtown Fort Collins Creative District, Old Firehouse Books, and our media partners KUNC and 105.5 The Colorado Sound. We'd like to give a special thanks to the Northern Colorado writers for presenting all 4 of our writers' workshops. Thank you to all of them. And thank you so much for supporting our 5th annual FOCO Book Festival. John Fielder has worked tirelessly to promote the protection of Colorado's ranches, open space, and wildlands during his 40-year career as a nature photographer and publisher. His photography has influenced people in legislation and has earned him recognition, including the 1993 Sierra Club Ansel Adams Award. In 2011, the Aldo Leopold Foundation's first achievement award ever given to an individual. And in 2017, Colorado Mountain College presented him an honorary degree in sustainability studies. 52 books have been published depicting his Colorado photography. He lives in Summit County, Colorado. Jeri Norgren is a 5th-generation Colorado native. Having spent most of her life exploring the mountains and all of the wonders they hold, she became fascinated with the nomenclature of the highest peaks and began her journey. As a member of the Denver Fortnightly Club, she has authored numerous papers on various topics, including the one that grew into this book. A lover of nature and everything it beholds, she lives on a historic farm in Englewood surrounded by dogs, coyotes, and a pair of great horned owls. So, John, if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks to Poudre Public Library, Old Firehouse Books, all the other sponsors for inviting Jeri and I today. And I'm not sure this is public knowledge, but recently I decided to donate my life's work of photography, 40 years of photography, to the Morgan Library at CSU. So when I kick, all my photos will still be available to the public, probably a lot cheaper than what I charge right now. So it's great to know that Morgan Library is part of this too. So I'm gonna show the audience some pretty pictures in a little bit, and Jeri's gonna talk about the text that she wrote for Colorado's Highest. But it's interesting how this project evolved. Ski season had been shut down by Governor Polis the middle of March, and I was wondering what I was gonna do for the next 3 months. And then the next day, Jeri contacted me and said that she had this book idea about telling people how the 14ers were named, 58 14ers, and who actually first climbed them also. And it struck me as a pretty good idea, but I wasn't really interested in anything more than just a $15 black and white book. And then that night I couldn't sleep. And the next day I called Jeri up and I said, hey, what if we include your writing, your history with my photos, with maybe fine art paintings by a man named Robert Wogrin, who did fine art oil paintings of all the 14ers back in the 1980s. And then the historical artwork and photography done by the Hayden Survey of the 1870s. And she thought that was a pretty good idea. And I came up with an editor, proofreader, graphic designer, and a printer all within 7 days, and 3 months later, we had actually produced the book, and it hit the stores the middle of September. So it's the fastest I've ever put together a project. And I think it's going to be a book for all time, not dissimilar to the Big Brown Book that a lot of the listeners and viewers today have my repeat photography book with William Henry Jackson's photos, including Hayden Survey photos, some of which are in this new book too. So that's the genesis of the project. I'm going to hand it over to Jeri to talk a little bit about the first three mountain ranges that I'm going to show: the Front Range, the Mosquito, and the 10 miles. So take it away, Jeri.
Thanks, John. I'm going to talk about some of my favorite peaks and how they got their names. And the first one is going to be Mount Evans. And I'm just going to read a little synopsis of what's in the book. During the 1860s, the Colorado Territory experienced substantial growth. Mining was in full swing. The government surveyors were diligently at work. Denver was growing and attracting settlers, and many curious East Coast travelers, writers, and artists were making the trip west to see firsthand the beauty that they had only heard and read about. One such artist was the renowned landscape painter Albert Bierstadt. Along with the journalist and author Fitzhugh Ludlow and two other traveling companions, Bierstadt arrived in Denver in June of 1863. Bierstadt wished to gather mountain sketches and scenes from which to create a great Rocky Mountain picture. Ludlow was to chronicle the trip, and the other two were along just for the pleasure of it. Bierstadt was introduced to William Newton Byers, founder and editor of the Rocky Mountain News, who would serve as his guide into the mountains. On June 17th, they departed Denver and headed up Chicago Creek to the base of the Chicago Mountains, with Bierstadt stopping, sketching, and painting along the way. Upon reaching the summit of the highest unnamed peak in the group, Bierstadt suggested the glorious peak be named Rosalie for the wife of his traveling companion, Fitzhugh Ludlow. This certainly was a grand romantic gesture, as well as a glimpse of events to come, because in a few years, Rosalie Osborne Ludlow would become Mrs. Albert Bierstadt upon her divorce from Ludlow. In the same year, Bierstadt's now famous painting, Storm in the Rocky Mountains, Mount Rosalie, debuted to wide acclaim. In 1872, during a political excursion to Greeley in celebration of the completion of the Union Pacific Railroad, the idea of changing the name of Mount Rosalie to Mount Evans was set in motion. Second Territorial Governor John Evans had been instrumental in helping establish the railroad, and this was an effort to honor him. It is not clear which peak they had in mind, so the name of Mount Evans came into use along with that of Mount Rosalie. Fast forward 22 years after the unofficial christening of Mount Evans to December of 1895, when a member of the Denver Fortnightly Club presented the matter of having the name of Mount Evans made legal by the next legislation. The Denver Fortnightly Club is a women's literary club which was founded in 1881 with Mrs. John Evans as a founding member and its first president. In March of 1895, Governor Albert McIntyre signed the bill a few days before Governor Evans's 81st birthday, making it official. The name of Mount Rosalie continued to remain in use for many years after that, until the name of Rosalie Peak was given to a 13,575-foot mountain to the southeast of Mount Evans. Overshadowed by the fame and beauty of the Front Range Mount Evans is a second Mount Evans, or Mount Evans B, as it is commonly called, residing in the Mosquito Range northeast of Leadville and 2 miles from Mount Sherman. This 13,577-foot peak gained its name from the local miners in the early 1860s when John Evans was territorial governor. In 1916, Roger Toll of the Colorado Mountain Club wrote to the USGS requesting a name change for this peak because there already was a much more prominent Mount Evans, and at times it became confusing as to which was which. The USGS reached out to the Leadville postmaster, who responded that the name of Evans frequently appears in the works of Professor F.S. Emmons's U.S. Geological Survey of the Leadville Mining District. The names of Mount Evans, Evans Amphitheater, and Evans Gulch are all mentioned often in Emmons's work, and a change in the name would lead to great confusion in the reading of his works, which are the Leadville Mining Man's Bible. So that name remains today. And then I will tell a little tale of how the Mosquito Range got its name. Parallel to the Front Range and about 40 miles west lies the Mosquito Range, which has an interesting story surrounding its name. As you have no doubt figured out, the name mosquito comes from the pesky insects known to swarm the area in the early summer, which in turn spawned a frenzy of naming of a great many geographical features in their dubious honor. the Mosquito Range, Mosquito Pass, Mosquito Gulch, and Mosquito Peak, all named after this bothersome insect. The story of the first use of mosquito as moniker goes like this. In 1861, a group of miners met to discuss a suitable title for their new mining district. A consensus could not be reached, so a blank space was left in the recorder's book and the men adjourned. A short time later, they returned to resume deliberations, and upon opening the recorder's book, discovered a squashed mosquito gracing the space where the name was to be recorded. With that as a sign, the men all agreed to name their mining district Mosquito Gulch. And soon after that, the name was given to many other features in the area, although it was often misspelled on early maps as Musquito. And that, I think now John's going to show some photographs from those ranges.
So a little more about the evolution of this project. You know, I'm not really a 14er climber or 14er photographer. I mean, I've been to the top a lot of the 58 14ers, but only because they were close by after I left my campsite at 12,000 feet next to that beautiful alpine lake in which I had photographed both the evening before and that morning reflections of peaks in the lakes. And that's kind of been my modus operandi over the years when I go into Colorado wilderness. So when Jeri suggested the book project, I needed to go through 25,000 4x5-inch color transparencies that I made from the 1980s into the 1990s, when I pretty much backpacked and later on llama packed every single drainage in Colorado, in all 28 mountain ranges, and looking for specifically 14,000 foot mountains, because I didn't really know in March this year, you know, which images had 14ers in them and which didn't. So that took me a long time. Once we decided to do the book, I probably spent 2 weeks editing these 25,000 photos, and I ended up coming up with maybe 60% of the 58 14ers. And by the way, some people say there's 54 14ers, but if you don't honor the 300-foot rule, which means if you have a peak nearby that's less than 300 feet higher than the contiguous one, and according to the Colorado Geographical Survey, that's how they qualify 14ers. There's actually 58 14ers in Colorado. So I found about 60% of the 14ers in my photos, and then I started wondering, how was I gonna have graphics about the other 14ers? And Jeri had done research with US Geological Survey and Library of Congress, who both possess the historical artwork that the Hayden Survey of the 1870s, that's Ferdinand Hayden. And he was, you know, his survey, there were multiple surveys, but his survey of the West was the one that was the most accurate and created the most illustrative maps and heights of the peaks of the American West. So we found a whole lot of beautiful original sketches made from the top of high peaks of the 14ers. And then William Henry Jackson was the official photographer for the Hayden Survey too. And I had, from that project I had done in the millennial year 2000, I had a number of Jackson photos, some of which I've included in this book too. And then I remembered back to the 1980s, a man named Bob Wogrin from Golden had been an architectural painter. So he, you know, back before computers, if an architect needed a rendering of a prospective building, he would hire an artist to do the rendering. But Bob got tired of doing that. So in the 1980s and 90s, he decided to take on a project of oil painting all 58 14ers, and he did that over the course of a decade. And he had asked me to publish a calendar back in the day of his paintings, and I had declined. But this past March, I remembered him and I contacted him, and he's now 93 years old and still kicking. And he said, yes, I'll share my paintings of the 14ers that you need with you. So the book contains my photos, the artwork from the Hayden Survey mostly, and Bob's paintings. And it's remarkable. I mean, the combination of 70,000 evocative, remarkable words that Jeri has written, and the quotations from the journals of the Hayden Survey, which are amazingly detailed about young grizzly bears, for example, rolling down tundra meadows at 12,000 feet, and the specifics of how these men did then what we do today, but without Gore-Tex, of backpacking and climbing all these mountains with massive amounts of gear. Is just fascinating. So what I'm going to do now, I'll during the course of the program, I'll show you 3 PowerPoints with music behind of a lot of the artwork in the book. And the first series of photos is going to be from the Front Range, the Mosquito Range, and the 10 Mile Range. And I put some lovely classical music behind Brahms behind it. So I'm going to be quiet. I think Jeri is too, and we'll just let you enjoy the visuals that are in the book now. So if you remember the Big Brown Book, Colorado 1870 to 2000, and if you read the introduction, you read that William Henry Jackson lugged 365 pounds of large format camera equipment and darkroom equipment also to these locations. Like that photograph of Quandary that you just saw then and now was made from Mount Democrat, basically. So Jackson was an unbelievable man. He was only 5'6". He had a squeaky high voice, but the guy makes me look like a wuss. I only had to carry 65 pounds of large format camera equipment to the top of mountains and some of these 14ers to do the project, like that photograph you just saw of Quandary. So Jeri is going to talk next a little bit about some of the history involving the Sawatch Range, which also includes the collegiate peaks, but in the book we actually create two separate chapters. But remember that the collegiate peaks are actually just subsidiary to the Great Sawatch Range that starts right about at Vail and goes all the way down south of Monarch Pass for a ways. And then I'll show some more images via PowerPoint, and Jeri might even talk about the Sangre de Cristos and the Elk Mountains too, which are part of this set. So Jeri, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk about one peak in the Sawatch and one peak in the Sangres. And the peak in the Sawatch is probably my most favorite of all the stories in the book because of the fortitude and resolve the citizens of Leadville and Lake County showed when it came to protecting this peak's name, and that is Mount Massive. Lying just a few miles to the west of Leadville in the Sawatch Range, the peak was given its name in 1873 by Henry Gannett, topographer with the Hayden Survey. He stated that the mountain named itself, its broad, heavy outline suggesting the name at once. Earlier locals and miners had simply called it Massive Mountain. As Leadville grew from its humble beginning as a mining camp, the town and its citizens played an important and unusual role that they never would have expected, that of protecting the name of their beloved mountain. It all began in 1901 when the first of 3 name change attempts was launched. That year, following the assassination of President William McKinley, the editors of the Denver Post took it upon themselves to recognize and commemorate the life of the 25th president by changing the name of Mount Massive to that of Mount McKinley. The editors ran a succession of articles with one particular headline accompanied by a large photo of Mount Massive declaring that Mount Massive, seen from a distance, is to be renamed Mount McKinley. With Mount Massive residing only a few miles from Leadville and an important geographic icon for the town, it is not surprising that the citizens of the town and surrounding Lake County had strong opinions otherwise. Letters were written, newspaper articles published, and petitions signed, all in opposition of robbing the mountain of its name. The collective voice of the people was heard, and the Denver Post dropped its name change campaign. And the citizens were at peace knowing they had helped their beloved mountain retain its name. That is, until 1915, when a Leadville miner suggested renaming the peak in honor of Henry Gannett, who had recently passed away. Again, much opposition with passionate letters written, articles in the papers, and even a poignant poem written by the editor of Leadville's newspaper, the Herald Democrat. After much back and forth between the Colorado and U.S. Geographic boards, it seemed as if the matter was put to rest and the name of Mount Massive would remain. However, in 1922, the new USGS maps came out, and on the Leadville quad was the name of Gannett Peak. Whether in place of Mount Massive's name or on one of Massive's highest summits remains uncertain because all the maps were swiftly destroyed due to the uproar it caused. After what was considerable opposition, the USGS reconsidered and removed Gannett's name from Mount Massive, instead giving it to the highest peak in Wyoming in the Wind River Range. Everyone was happy in knowing they had thwarted name change attempt number 2. However, in 1965, a young state senator from Denver launched a third proposal to rename the peak Mount Sir Winston Churchill following the prime minister's death. Considering that Churchill had no ties whatsoever to Colorado and its mountains, this fight to reject the proposal was short-lived and swift. Mount Massive withstood 3 name change attempts. It reigned victorious each time thanks to the dogged determination and loyalty of the citizens of Leadville, Lake County, and the state of Colorado. After 147 years, it appears that the name is here to stay. And then one down in the Sangres, which is Challenger Point. Challenger Point was the last and most recent 14er to receive its name, which is much more than just a name. It is an emotional tribute. Located in the Sangre de Cristo Range, Challenger Point is a subpeak of Kit Carson. Following the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger on January 28, 1986, Dennis Williams, a resident of Colorado Springs, proposed to the U.S. Board on Geographic Names the name of Challenger Point to commemorate the 7 crew members who lost their lives. The BGN deferred for 1 year in accordance with their rule at the time, which stated that the intended honoree of a new name must have been deceased for at least a year. Over the course of the next year, an impressive amount of grassroots support was generated in favor of the name, and on April 9, 1987, the BGN officially approved the designation of Challenger Point. On July 18, 1987, 5 people placed a bronze plaque on the summit honoring the astronauts. The idea was initiated by Fort Collins resident Alan Silverstein, and the 6 by 12-inch plaque reads as follows: Challenger Point, 14,080 plus feet. In memory of the crew of Shuttle Challenger, 7 who died attempting the risk expanding man's horizons. January 28, 1986. Ad astra per aspera, which is a Latin phrase meaning to the stars through hardships.
Great story, Jeri. Thank you. You saw Mount Cameron earlier, and that photo was actually made by John Kiedrowski. So he's a friend of mine, mountain climber from Vail. So between the other 3 forms of artwork, I was able to come up with 56 of the 58 image peaks. And when you see the Sangre de Cristos in this next sequence, you're going to see one more Kiedrowski photo of Culebra Peak. Also remember, there were multiple surveys of the West. John Wesley Powell conducted one, and the Army under a man named Wheeler did another one, but it was the Hayden Survey from 1870 to 1878 that produced the best data, the most accurate maps, and the amazing history that Jeri has used. So now I'd like to share with you the Saguache Range, including the Collegiate Peaks, also the Sangre de Cristos and the Elk Mountains, which is the area around Aspen. And this time I'm going to put Mendelssohn behind the photos. So how'd you like that photo of Kit Carson Peak with the bison in the foreground? How ironic is that, given that when Kit Carson was exploring the West, there were masses, tens of thousands of bison, including in the San Luis Valley where that photo was made. And that's actually the existing Medno Zapata Ranch, owned and operated by the Nature Conservancy. And they've got 2,500 head of bison down there trying to recreate the ecosystem the way it used to be. So I'm going to hand it back over to Jeri. We're going to conclude the program with the Great San Juan Mountains of southwestern Colorado. And Jeri's going to tell you a story about a couple of peaks there.
Yeah, two peaks, Sunshine and El Diente. The tale of the first ascent of Sunshine Peak is made all the more interesting due to the writing of assistant topographer Franklin Rhoda. Situated in the southern San Juan Mountains, this peak qualifies for the Colorado Geological Survey's list of 14ers by a mere foot and is in jeopardy of losing its status when new advanced measurements will be released in 2022. The first official ascent was made in 1874 by two members of the Hayden Survey, Franklin Rhoda and A.D. Wilson, after whom Mount Wilson and Wilson Peak are named. As topographers with the survey, they used Sunshine Peak, as they did many other high peaks, as a triangulation station for getting measurements of the surrounding mountains. These peaks were often referred to as stations and assigned only a number with no name. Sunshine Peak was merely Station 12 on their maps and didn't receive its name until 1906, which was given by the U.S. Geological Survey. Prior to the surveys of 1873 and 74, the peak had the previous names of Niagara Peak and Sherman Mountain, but neither were acknowledged by either the Hayden nor the Wheeler surveys. Franklin Rhoda's documentation of the summer of 1874 for the Hayden Survey report is entitled Report on the Topography of the San Juan Country and is masterfully and beautifully written. His description of the electrical storm they experienced while on the summit of Sunshine Peak captures the reader so thoroughly one can imagine they were there, as well as illustrating how dedicated these men were to their jobs. Once on the summit, Rhoda and Wilson had barely started their work when they began feeling a tickling sensation in their hair, and as Rhoda tells it, at first this sensation was only perceptible and not at all troublesome. Still, its strength surprised us, since the cloud causing it was several miles distant to the southwest of us. By holding up our hands above our heads, a tickling sound was produced, which was still louder if we held a hammer or other instrument in our hand. The tickling sensation above mentioned increased quite regularly at first, and presently was accompanied by a peculiar sound, almost like that produced by the frying of bacon. We felt that we could not stop, though. The frying of our hair became louder and more disagreeable, for certain parts of the drainage of this region could not be seen from any other peak, and we did not want to ascend this one a second time. They continued working until the lightning strokes were coming quicker and quicker, and according to Rhoda, only separated by 2 or 3 minutes of time, and we knew our peak would soon be struck. The instruments were producing a terrible humming, which, with the noises emitted by the thousands of angular blocks of stone and the sounds produced by their hair, made such a din they could scarcely think. The duo made a dash for it and headed down as quickly as possible, finally reaching camp late at night, thoroughly drenched, tired, and hungry. Rhoda humorously shares his thoughts regarding the ending of their harrowing day. If I could end the history of the adventures of this remarkable day by describing how we were pleasantly housed in dry, comfortable quarters, and how we contentedly wrapped the drapery of our couch above us and lay to pleasant dreams, I would. But alas, how the romance would be taken out of the story if I should tell you how we crawled into our low, short, and narrow little tents with the water running down the edges and leaking through at the top, and how we had to lie as still as possible, lest we might disturb the pools of water gradually collecting on our blankets and precipitate them into the inner recesses of our bedclothes. All this and more shall I leave untold. Rhoda's writing was incredible. And the next peak is El Diente. Located in the subrange of the San Juan Mountains, known as the San Miguel Mountains, El Diente was not attempted by the men of the Hayden Survey in the summer of 1874, They did, however, climb neighboring Mount Wilson and only gave a mere mention of El Diente in their report. They simply said, to the west and quite near was a pretty high peak. It wouldn't be until July 4th of 1930 that the mountain was first ascended and named by Dwight Lavender and 2 other men, or so they thought. Lavender called it El Diente, which in Spanish means the tooth, because the peak's ragged outline resembled many teeth. A few months after his climb, Lavender came across an article in an 1891 issue of an Alpine journal written by Percy Thomas, where he talks about his climb up Mount Wilson in 1890. As Lavender delved into the details of the article, he began to realize that the peak Thomas claimed to have climbed was not Mount Wilson, but indeed El Diente. In a 1931 article for the Colorado Mountain Club's Trail and Timberline, Lavender explains in detail how he came to this conclusion and assigns the first ascent to Thomas. At an early age, Dwight Lavender took an enthusiastic interest in mountaineering and exploration, and with 2 others would form the core of an energetic group known as the San Juan Mountaineers, and they would contribute more to the knowledge of mountaineering in the San Juans than any other group. Unfortunately, the mountaineering community would never fully realize all that Lavender was capable of contributing. In 1934, after returning to Stanford University to resume his graduate studies in geology, he died suddenly from polio at the age of 23. Few have contributed more to the sport in such a short time than Dwight Lavender. He is remembered by a peak named in his honor, Lavender Peak, located in the La Plata Mountains near Durango.
Thank you, Jeri.
Uh-huh.
Very evocative, and I would like you all to enjoy the great San Juan Mountains now, and let's put the great Brahms again behind it. That was Mount Sneffels off to the left in that photo from Last Dollar Ranch. A couple of notes before we go to questions and answers. Those other contemporary black and white sketches were also by Mr. Wogrin. And exciting news. This weekend, I'm coming down to the Front Range to photograph autumn color in Weld County, the end of a 4-year project. And in September of next year, I'm going to publish for the Weld Community Foundation, which will raise hopefully a lot of money for that wonderful organization, a book celebrating the glory of Weld County. The current book is available, of course, from Old Firehouse Books. If you can't get it from them, go to johnfielder.com and we will sell it to you directly and ship it to you. Easily done, but do it now because of COVID, I was nervous. I didn't print enough books and we're going to be sold out before Christmas. Take it away, Kristen.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeri and John. That was absolutely wonderful. Beautiful, beautiful pictures and really interesting stories behind it. I do have a first question from Rodney on Facebook. It says, the authors haven't mentioned that, of course, the indigenous peoples of Colorado had names for and did the first ascents of all the peaks mentioned. Does this book include this? And can you comment on this thought? And then lastly, he says, thank you for sharing this beautiful book.
Okay.
Jeri?
Yes, there were lots of indigenous names for the peaks. However, a lot of them weren't written down. So a lot of those names have been lost. And the ones that there are names for that were easy to find are mentioned in the books. And again, nothing was really written down. So when I talk about first official ascents in the books, those are most likely the men of the surveys, because those were actually written down. So if the Indians, traveled to the tops of these peaks in the course of their daily travels or, hunting or whatever, it again was never written down. So that history, is lost. But yes, he's right in assuming that a lot of the indigenous people did travel to the tops of these peaks.
Thank you. And for everyone else, please go ahead and send in your questions and we'll try and get those answered. A couple more. Let's see. I think this one's for John. What's changed over the last 40 years that you've been doing photography, and especially with the pandemic? What has changed with that?
That is a loaded question. You have 3 hours. Well, I'm an environmentalist and I got 4 grandkids and I worry for their future and that they might not be able to enjoy all the things that I've enjoyed over the last 40 years. So I hope all of you watching and listening today understand how serious climate change is. 7.6 billion humans using the same trailheads at the same time. We've all seen it through the course of the summer. But on the other hand, how blessed we are to have a place, Colorado, to call home. So despite the challenges, I have a hard time not enjoying things just the way they are. But I'm working really hard personally to make sure that we protect what's left of biodiversity and wildness on the planet. And I hope the rest of you take on that challenge too.
Great, thank you. I have another question from Audrey on Facebook. So it's a question for you as well, John. In your studies of historical images of these mountains, are there apparent environmental changes between then and now?
Absolutely, great question. If you have a copy, and I don't know too many people that don't have a copy of the big brown leather bound book, Colorado 1870 to 2000, the repeat photography book, take a look at forests in the 1870s and 80s when Jackson photographed them around the state, and then look at my reciprocal photo, and you'll see a lot of change. For example, in Jackson's day, not nearly as many aspen trees, more conifers in locations, but that's bespeaks of the cyclical nature of forests and why we can't judge either what's going on right now with so many fires, the content of the forest in terms of which species, because forests operate in multi-100-year cycles.
Great, thank you. I have a question from Peter on Facebook. Now that George Gore is getting his comeuppance with the new true range, are there other awful people who have had peaks named for them?
Another loaded question. This one for
Another
Jeri.
yeah, a really loaded question. Who's, people's opinion of who's awful and who's not. I mean, those are differing opinions. Yes, there are other peaks. Actually, there's 18 or 19 geographical features now on the list for the new Colorado Naming Board to deal with. Mount Evans being one of them is the most prominent one. And there's other ones. Squaw Peak and Squaw Pass and things like that are all going to be deliberated by the Colorado Naming Board.
Speaking of Gore Range, as I sit here making this presentation, I'm looking to my left at the Gore Range. I live north of Silverthorne in the Williams Fork Mountains, and I wake up every morning. And yeah, I would have to say that based on what I understand of Lord Gore, who shot and killed gratuitously, thousands of creatures, not for sustaining he and his crew with food, but in a very gratuitous way. So yeah, we're looking forward to renaming the Gore Range here pretty soon.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question came in. Why do you think Colorado and so many outdoor enthusiasts so closely identifies itself with 14ers?
Jeri.
Me? Well, because Colorado has the highest amount of 14,000 foot peaks in the United States. And this climbing of the 14ers started years and years ago. And it just built from there. And, it wasn't just that, who was the one that climbed all of them? Then it got to be who climbed them in the quickest amount of time, who, skied them, who, climbed them at night, all these different records. I just think it's the nature of people to do these accomplishments. John, what do you think?
We call that anthropocentrism.
You call it what?
I'll let the rest of you look it up. Anthropocentrism.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. That was our final question. I just wanted to thank everybody here for attending. Jeri and John, thank you so much for presenting. This was just absolutely gorgeous and just thoroughly interesting. My favorite happens to be the mosquito. I love the idea of mosquito range and mosquito because there was a mosquito squashed into the book. I think that's fabulous. If you would like to purchase any of John's books, just go to oldfirehousebooks.com/bookfest 2020. Book plates are available for select authors. Please indicate in the comment section in your order if you are interested in a signed copy. And then finally, please go to www.focobookfest.org and fill out our survey. We rely on your input in planning future book festivals. So again, just thank you so much. This was just a wonderful program, and I was so honored to host you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Poudre Public Libraries. Keep up the good work for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.